Hello, I'm Dr. Esther Lee. Welcome to Dr. Lilly Cheng's series of the Old and New Silk Roads. Old Silk Roads can be traced back to more than 2,000 years ago. It's human nature to search for a better life, even with the risky and long journeys. The ancient international traders who traveled through old Silk Roads from China to Europe had similar motives of profits as today's global traders. To improve people's life, exchanging goods through trade has been the most desirable goals for past rulers. Today, Dr. Lilly Cheng will continue our discussion on the old and the new Silk Roads. Hello, Dr. Cheng. Welcome back to our series with a focus on two-way trades between China and the West.
Thank you. Good morning from San Diego. I am on the campus of San Diego State University. I am sitting in the Chinese Cultural Center. As you can see in the background, we have some Chinese artifacts. So please come to join us when you are in San Diego. I'm so happy to continue our discussion about the Silk Road, the land and the ocean Silk Road. Yes.
Wow, wonderful. What's a refreshing background. Thank you for sharing your location with us. First, Dr. Cheng, would you mind briefly introducing the main character of our series, Imperial Envoy Zheng He, and his adventures in the 15th century?
Yes, Zheng He his name has been written in so many different ways, but let's just say that his last name, Zheng, actually wasn't his real last name. His real last name was Ma, and He means peace, or was also given to him as a name. His original name was Sanbao, so his whole name was Ma Sanbao. Later on, he became Ma He, and finally Zheng He. Zheng can be spelled as Z-H-E-N-G, C-H-E-N-G, and others. And He could be H-E or H-O. And a lot of people said he. I said, it's really not a he. It's a he. Well, he was a eunuch. He was taken away from his village by the Ming Empress army. And because of his way of dealing with people and things, the emperor at that time was very interested and very appreciative of him. So the emperor gave him the name Zheng He and gave him a huge title and responsibility as the admiral that took the Ming Empire far and wide through the ocean Silk Road. So as a result, most of us know about him and his 7 journeys across the waters. And so he was indeed a very important person and also chiefly responsible for the designs of these voyages and these wonderful trips to many parts of the world. And so from the early days of 1413, he began his journey. His journey took many times up to 2 years. It was dangerous. The journey could not be known as to what might happen on his journey, but he eventually arrived on the east side of Africa. So today we know for sure that the Africans welcomed Zheng He and his men. And also he was a true diplomat. He was able to make peace with the people and the peoples and places that he traveled. I would consider him a huge ambassador and diplomat. And his journeys were huge. His fleets were huge. sometimes up to 250 ships carrying China, meaning porcelain, tea, lacquer, silk, and many precious Chinese goods. And wherever he went, he left these precious items behind as gifts, as goodwill gestures.
Great. Okay, let's see what's the ship look like. Well, this is only, proportionally speaking.
Yeah. So I wanted to point out two important features about this particular slide. This slide with the red color sails was considered the China sailboat, and the sails were developed by the Chinese, and they were so flexible and collapsible, making it very difficult for the boat to tip over. These sails are called Chinese sails. Next to the Chinese sail, you see the little boat that was called the Santa Maria, the boat that Christopher Columbus took eventually to arrive in the Americas. You can see the difference in size, probably 20 to 25 bigger in terms of Zheng He's fleet. But also, if you look at the sails, the European sailboats, they are one piece. So they don't have the flexibility as the Chinese sailboats. And as a result, many European-style sailboats, when they tip over, and they sank very rapidly. As a result, I was told that Christopher Columbus, his fleet was no more than 3 sailboats. And Zheng He's fleet, they were more than 250 sailboats in one group. So the differences were huge, and yet so few of us, even us, know anything about Zheng He's fleets and also the way they did their work. It took us many years to figure out because the records of Zheng He's fleets were destroyed after he passed away. Destroyed. When you destroy historical documents and archives, nothing was left. So how could we find out whether Zheng He did exist? And how could we find out where did he go? What did he do? What did he say? Because we were able to find out because he stopped at many ports and many places. Also, many ships sank. We were able to get a time capsule underneath the water. And these shipwrecks help us to tell a story. So you're showing us the Belitung shipwreck. Belitung is in Indonesia. This particular shipwreck would be considered one of the most magnificent archaeological discovery. This shipwreck is also called the Nanking shipwreck, the Nanking cargo. Nanking or Nanjing used to be called the southern capital of China. And indeed, Zheng He's fleet, the fleet was built in Nanjing. We still have records of that from today. So the cargo, the Nanjing cargo, they had more than 60,000 pieces of Changsha ware. Changsha is another city known for the making of Chinese porcelain. Beautiful collection of single Tang Dynasty artifacts in one site. So this cargo was actually before Zheng He, but you could also see the beginning of the Silk Road, Ocean Silk Road, started long before Zheng He took on his voyages. In fact, he had maps from before, so he followed the maps and his fleet would always see the land on their right side as they travel. We will see a map later on. But as you can see, this particular cargo actually was taken from Nanjing, but also the ship was an Arabic ship. So today, the the Arabian nations, they are very proud of their own sailboats. They have many, many competitions of their sailboats. They look very different. So this particular shipwreck, we found not only the cargo, but also the Arab doll, and it was done differently than the Chinese nor the European. So can we see the next one, please? So when we talk about porcelain, another word needs to be introduced here. It's called crock, K-R-A-A-K, called the crock porcelain. The crock porcelain, many were made in the Wanli period of the Ming Dynasty, and many were also made in Jindezhen. You know, even a broken piece like on the right or the left will still are considered very, very precious. Now, the reasons why they were precious the reason is because the Europeans, they were fascinated by China. They couldn't figure out how such a piece could be made. They loved the blue, they loved the white. So during the Wanli period, the crock porcelain was considered so precious that if you ever travel to Belgium and then to the Netherlands, you'll find in the museums a lot of these pieces. So in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, you will find these pieces. Actually, the photographs came from that museum. Next, please. Also, because the people in Holland, the Dutch, were so fascinated by the Ming Chinaware, the crock Chinaware, they began to imitate the making of the Chinaware, the crock porcelain. And in a town or city called Delft, today Delft is considered one of the best places to find the Delft porcelain. But in the year around 1659 or later, the Delft porcelain were considered poor quality, and it was a financial disaster. So what they did was they destroyed some of these porcelains and they put them in their canal. And then you can see on the left side what they found, you know, in their canal and in their cesspool. They found these misfired porcelain out of Delft. But Delft people learn fast. They learn steadily. And today, Delft porcelain is considered very well done in the imitation of the Ming porcelain, even more specifically, the crock porcelain. So let's go to the next page. You know, the Dutch people love porcelain. So they did an exhibition in Amsterdam, and it's called No Delft Without China. In this case, they meant the country of China. They also meant the porcelain, China porcelain. So the Delftware, there was great competition and there was great inspiration because they wanted to make their own porcelain. They wanted to compete with China, but they were totally inspired by China, the China from China. So in 1627, a ship named Wapen van Delft brought back 9,440 pieces of porcelain, partially captured, partially bought. These porcelains became the Delft inspiration. In 1629, they brought back 5,320 pieces of porcelain. They were taken from a prize ship and stored inside the pepper, meaning many of the ships also carry not only tea, but also spices. In this case, as you know, salt and pepper. Pepper came from Southeast Asia. They came from Indonesia. Indonesia has one of the largest pepper plantation or production out of Southeast Asia. So you can imagine totaling 15,000 pieces in the two ships. They went to Delft, they went to the Netherlands. So this exhibition took place in 2017 to 2018. It was a tremendous exhibition, but they gave credit to China and porcelain from China. You can see this particular flyer clearly indicating no Delft without China. No China, no Delft. Next page, please. So, in the Ming Dynasty, as we talked about, Zheng He clearly was the one that marked the Ocean Silk Road. So on the right side, you can see the ocean map out of China through the Taiwan Strait, all the way down through to the Malacca Strait, from the South China Sea over to the Indian Ocean, over to India, and then through the Arabian Sea to Arabia, and then from there to the Horn of Africa, and then going downward to the east coast of Africa, actually to Mogadishu, and then actually to Kenya, to the east coast of Africa. And then they stop at the tip of the Horn of Africa. Eventually, then they went through the Nile River all the way to Alexandria, and then on to the Mediterranean Sea. So you can see the sea, the Red Sea, the east coast of Africa were places where Zheng He, during his 7 journeys, went through. The trade also included Java, Sumatra, Malacca, the Spices Islands, very important, and also to Cochin and Calicut in India. So this is why we then eventually have the East Indian Company. It's all because India was very strategic, and today is still very strategic in terms of the Ocean Silk Road. So the emperor assigned Zheng He to employ 63 large ships with crew of over 27,000 men. Just imagine 27,000 men on those ships to set sail, showing the China power. So the Chinese show their power through their maritime Silk Road.
Yeah, just think about the logistics. It's amazing. But after all, money talks. Just like today, the historical kings and the emperors accumulated wealth from trades benefited not only their subjects, but also their own military strength and the territorial expansion. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, as you probably have told us, after Envoy Zheng He's demise, the Ming Emperor closed all the coastal cities for any additional voyages. So meanwhile, the closed-door policy gradually led to the downfall of the Ming Dynasty within 100 years.
Yes.
Later, the founding emperor of the new dynasty, Qing, about the 17th century, reversed just briefly the closed-door policy. Dr. Chen, would you please just explain the change in history in China's closed-door or open-door policy?
Yeah, I mean, because the Ming Dynasty, there were different emperors. And as you know, some emperors just decided it would be best to shut down and close the door. Now, however, the Ocean Silk Road, as well as the Land Silk Road, had already taken place. The people already came over from many parts of the world. It is impossible to actually close the doors anymore. The doors were open in different parts of China, from the ports to the land. So it was actually a foolish thing for the emperors to do. And by force, they really had to open doors. So what they did was allowing the port of Guangzhou, also known in English as Canton, to open some doors. What were the doors? They were called the 13 hang. And the word hang in Chinese actually means companies. 银行, hang, 行号, hang. So these nations had their hangs in the port of Guangzhou. Of course, one of the largest hangs was Great Britain. The second one, or second, third, would be Portugal, and then Sweden, and also we had Dutch, and so on. Meantime, they had East India companies also in India as a stopping point for their ships to come all the way from Europe to India, then through the South China Sea, eventually to China. And the port of Guangdong became, or Canton, became such an important port for commerce, for trade. And the port of Canton flourished. And also, because of Canton, we had the Opium War, where Lin Zexu actually burned the opiums in the harbor of Guangdong. Yeah. May I go to the next? And we can see. So this 13 hang, the hang means company. At the end of the 17th century in Guangzhou, or also known as Guangdong Canton, it is absolutely, to even today, a beautiful trading port. You know, today, Guangzhou Airport is considered one of the largest in China. Guangzhou Port is considered one of the largest in China as well, from land and from sea. So these establishments, these hangs, uniformly imported foreign products and sold Chinese goods. And let me just say, the Chinese goods were so sought after: porcelain, tea, silk, and other things. The 13 hang consisted of agencies referred to as merchant house or trading house. They are appointed by the Qing government as official trading companies. So during the time of the existence of the 13 hang, they really serve as the Qing government's window of foreign trade and shoulder the responsibility of foreign trade management, significantly impacting the economic history of China in the Qing dynasty, that is before 1911.
So a nation's power is built upon a strong and a solid national wealth. And our victory of World War II was an excellent example. And we, the United States, gained plenty of resources from trading with other nations during the 19th and the 20th centuries, especially with Europe. At the same time, UK's diminishing global trading volumes failed to support their military operations during World War II. And their early trading mechanisms, running for more than 2 centuries, were losing strength. Let's look at the UK's trading relationships with China, if we can, back to the 18th century, especially the famous or infamous British trading enterprise, East India Companies.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, as you can see, East India companies, they were not one, they were many. Okay, you can see some of the emblems to show. In London, for example, the British East India Company was a huge enterprise, and in the Netherlands also, the Dutch East India Company, and also we have the French East India Company. We also have the Portuguese East India Company. We also have Austrian East India Company. And as I said to you earlier, the Swedish had the Swedish East India Company. All these companies carry goods from China to Europe, and then goods from Europe to China, because you cannot have empty boats coming to China. So the Great Britain found a very ingenious way to do it. They had grown opium in India, and they ship opium to China. Now, the Chinese welcome the opium as a way, as a trading situation. The Chinese enjoy the use of opium, and it was considered at the first something that was considered a wonderful way to entertain oneself. So opium houses open up everywhere. Not only the rich and the famous enjoy opium, even the coolies enjoy opium. The opium dens were everywhere, not only in Canton, not only in all over China, but also in Hong Kong and in Macau. So there were just so many places like that. So opium was going on. And the Chinese people got weaker and weaker because, as you know, opium is a very deadly drug. And, this type of addiction can kill a person. The person would probably stop eating and drinking and just linger in the opium dens. And so a official from the Qing dynasty named Lin Zexu decided, this is enough. Enough is enough. We must burn the opium. And so he did. And this opened up the opportunity for Great Britain to actually attack China. This was the infamous, Opium War, and China lost big time. And because of that, China ceded many places to other parts of the world, including the fragrant harbor, so-called Xianggang. Hong Kong was ceded to Great Britain until 1997. So I think this is enough of history for all of us to remember, but also infamous enough so that the history of Hong Kong started because of the Opium War. The Opium War started because of opium. And opium started because of the Great Britain's growing of opium in India from East Indian Company. So at its peak, the British East India Company was the largest corporation in the entire world, competing with Dutch India Company. So the Great Britain was doing a lot of shipping with opium and other items, including shipping to the United States. So as you know, we have the East Indian Company even had armed forces. They had armies totaling about 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the army of actual Great Britain. The operations of the company had a profound effect on the global balance and trade, almost single-handedly reversing the trend of eastward drain of Western bullion seen since the Roman Empire. The company was dissolved in 1874 as a result of the East Indian Stock Dividend Redemption Act. The official government machinery of the British Raj had assumed its governmental functions and absorbed its armies. So, East Indian companies. The Boston Tea Party had a relationship. It was a political protest that occurred on December 16, 1773, at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts. American colonists, frustrated and angry at Britain for imposing taxation without representation, dumped 242 chests of tea imported by the British East Indian Company into the harbor. Many people know the Boston Tea Party. Okay. It was part of history and also part of American history and British history, certainly part of the British East Indian Company history.
So how about other European nations trade with China during the Qing dynasty, which is about 17 to 20, early 20th centuries? Here we can see the traditional, maybe Viking spirits.
Yes.
Let me show the slides.
Yeah, so the Swedish people also, the Viking spirit, they were very powerful, and they went back and forth between Sweden and China. So this Göteborg II or Gothenburg II is a replica of the 18th century ship that actually they planned to resell the trading route from Sweden to China. They were going to do it actually right before the COVID, but I don't know whether they did it or not. I had the opportunity, please next slide. I had the opportunity to actually go to Sweden to look at the ship. And it was it is and was a full-scale replica called the Göteborg II, because the first one actually sank right in front of the port of Göteborg. And now it stands in Stockholm in April of 2022. It will set sail sometime for China. As you can see, it was the replica. So not only the people from the Netherlands, the Dutch people, the Portuguese people, the Spaniards, the French, the Brits, also the Swedish, the Vikings, they were everywhere. Yes. So I also wanted to talk about the Dutch East India Company. Pronk was an important person. In 1734, the Dutch East India Company commissioned Pronk to produce designs for a set of plates. So he was actually commissioned to make porcelain. And so we know about the Pronk porcelain. Actually, they were very popular, and they became also something that the Dutch people were happy to have. And they were blue and white, and they were shipped to Amsterdam. And he was one of the ones that made sure they had very good quality china. Next, please. So in the Qing dynasty, as I said earlier, 1911 was the overturn of the last emperor. They were taken out of the Forbidden City. But during the Ming dynasty preceded Qing. Qing succeeded Ming. China exported over 150 million pieces of porcelain to the West. However, for hundreds of years, foreigners still had not discovered the production and the material techniques for making porcelain. Groups of missionaries and travelers traveled from afar to China, hoping to discover the secret of Chinese porcelain, and a missionary did. In order to obtain porcelain, many kings and nobles started their own laboratories in search of the secret sauce. Even Marco Polo used every opportunity to pry into the secret of Chinese porcelain production, but his understanding remained very limited. It was a priest that did that, and it was the priest that wrote about the making of porcelain from Jingdezhen. Next, please.
Okay, so now we can see that the old Silk Roads are not just limited to the land journeys and also ocean voyages with large volumes of trading goods. In addition to the cargo, we used to think about the silk. Now there are more attractive items, especially like you said, the porcelain. So Dr. Chen, well, would you be able to recommend any documentary that may give people some ideas of China's China porcelain?
China's China. Absolutely. Let me just say that BBC did a beautiful documentary. I recommend it highly. And if possible, if you can show a snippet of it later on. I enjoy watching this documentary. I'm sure you will too. So this is the BBC documentary. By the way, if you Google, you'll find a lot more information about the Opium War, about China, and about China and China. And I'm sure you will enjoy very, very much.
Chinese bowl once belonged to Queen Elizabeth I. It's made of a material which was unknown in Europe until the 1500s. And when that material arrived, it caused a sensation.
In the 16th century, porcelain became a cult item amongst the very wealthy.
The intelligentsia and the aristocracy kept porcelain in their cabinets of curiosity.
By the 18th century, the fever had spread to the middle classes.
People are so mad for it that they're getting into debt. They're going bust. They're wasting their family's wealth.
The making of porcelain was shrouded in mystery. European potters tried in vain to copy it.
Chinese porcelain is probably really the most misunderstood material in ceramic history.
The insatiable demand created a global trade. The blue and white imagery on the wares changed our idea of what was beautiful. The British dining table would never be the same again.
I had porcelain fever for most of my life. And the best way to tell the story of how blue and white porcelain arrived in the West from China is to go there.
I'm going to the source, to one of the world's first industrial cities. I'll follow the route taken by millions of cups, plates and bowls to try to find out why these wares were so prized then and now.
It's a story ripe for the telling because now it's the Chinese who've got the fever.
The new emperors are buying back their history, making Chinese porcelain some of the most expensive art ever to come under the hammer.
£1 million, ladies and gentlemen. 1,500,000. 1,700,000.
The Victoria and Albert Museum in London is home to objects that define the British. On the 6th floor, there's a collection about control and our ability to lose it.
Between the 17th and 18th centuries, the aristocrats and merchants of England became increasingly hungry for Chinese porcelain. At its height, in the mid-18th century, it's estimated that over 2 million pieces of porcelain arrived in London. And that was at a time when the whole population of these islands was no more than around 6 million. It wasn't just this magical white, translucent material that interested them, but it was the images of a far distant, mysterious place, Cathay, China. Over the years, I've been involved with many ceramic valuations. My job's been to look at vases, plates, dishes, owned by people whose ancestors just had to have them, whether they were new at the time or had become antiques. And it's those successive waves of China mania which have brought us these fabulous national collections that we have. But how did this love affair with Chinese porcelain start? How was the trade regulated? And just what was it that gave it its value? Was it the nature of the porcelain itself, or did it have something to do with the complexity of bringing it from China to Europe?
Like any consumer craze, it started with a gap in the market.
In Europe, in the 16th or 17th century, all you would have seen were stonewares and earthenwares, quite rough pots. And suddenly you see something which is thin as paper, white, shiny, translucent, and you wonder what on earth this magic substance is. In fact, early Europeans didn't know what porcelain was. They thought it was some kind of precious stone.
Porcelain was harder than our toughest stonewares. If you hit it with a spoon, it rang like a bell, but it didn't flake, chip, or scratch. It was resistant to heat, and the color didn't fade.
It was very hard. It was white, and when you held it up to the light, you could see it was translucent. Better still, it came from far off China, and only the Chinese knew how to make it.
All over Europe, scientific gentlemen experimented in vain to try to work out what made porcelain so fine. Collectors were obsessed. There was a fortune to be made.
The swank value of porcelain was quite high. In fact, in many cases, porcelain even replaced precious metals like gold and silver.
A beautiful, exotic, hard-to-get product in limited supply. The Portuguese and Dutch had been first to the source, so the British aristocracy had to beg, borrow, or steal it. In 1602, they did just that. When a Portuguese boat loaded with porcelain was stolen by the Dutch in mid-ocean, it came up for auction. The kings of France and England bid.
Yeah, if you ever go to the British Museum in London and you have a chance to go in there, you will find a lot of porcelain. They have a special room there, and you can go and visit that particular room where absolutely a fantastic collection of China will be presented in front of your eyes, and it's very lovely. Now, so you can see China, the Ocean Silk Road extends to Europe, to Africa, to, of course, the Americas, and to South America. And that is why, if you look at today's Chinese diaspora, you'll find many people in South America, including, of course, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, etc. You will find them there. And they went to, the people went from China to South America by sea. And of course, all the way out to Europe and all the way out to Africa.
China's old Silk Roads opened the interaction of trade and culture between the East and the West. The current China's One Belt and One Road initiative also serves the same purposes. The end results of the East and West interactions have promoted global social prosperity and cultural understanding. As the history tells us, without global trading, any nation will wither and decline because their wealth will diminish. Eventually, they run out of resources to support their military strength. Is this something we Americans need to think about? Again, thank you, Dr. Chen, for your interesting presentation. We are looking forward to your additional intriguing discoveries soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you for tuning in our channel, and see you next time.